Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World, I'm talking with someone who's been living and working entirely in the permaculture world for over 3 decades. His work in Nepal is inspirational and has influenced many programs globally. He fell in love with Nepal way back in 1985 when he was living there as a volunteer for community forestry programs. But he realised soon that international development models weren't actually working. That's when he discovered permaculture and enrolled himself in a permaculture design course with Bill Mollison. And since then, he's helped to adapt permaculture to the Himalayan context and brought learning opportunities to thousands of small farms, creating demonstration centres, local curriculum and resources, school programs, leading permaculture courses, training the trainer courses, and also helping with the establishment of barefoot trainers who go as needed to the villages to help build resilience in farming communities. He says himself that he's actually not driving this, he just offers advice as needed and helps to do international networking, that this is actually a self-directed program. and is absolutely wonderful. I'm so thrilled to welcome to the show Chris Evans, who I met 25 years ago, together with his partner Luby McNamara, who's also been a guest of this show, and his daughters Shanti and Taya. They started the Applewood Permaculture Centre in England on the Welsh border. I was so thrilled to visit them there back in 2019 before COVID hit, to catch up and also to spend this time with him today to really dive more deeply into the work that he does in permaculture development. So many valuable lessons in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Chris. It's an absolute delight to have you here. I think our work has kind of been in similar places, obviously within permaculture, for a very long time. And we met first, oh my gosh, was it in Perth? Was it in Perth? Did you come to the Perth International Conference in 1996 or something ridiculously a long time ago?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I was there.
Yeah, well, welcome to the show. And maybe we can just begin there. Like, your life, like my life, has been very much surrounded with the whole world of permaculture. Where did it begin for you? Like, what's got you started in the world of permaculture, and why did you stay in it? What attracted you and what keeps you?
Yeah, it's a story I've told many times, I suppose, but it's always different each time. So I was working in Nepal as a volunteer with an organisation called VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas, and I was seconded to a community forestry program. So I was working in community forestry with a project that was actually in 29 districts of Nepal, very big, highly funded FAO, World Bank, United Nations and government-funded project, and it was hopeless. It utterly failed in its goals to, plant more trees, involve people more in community forests, etc. It has worked in some areas better, but in my area, which was the district of Jajikot, very remote in those days, very remote, no electric, no roads, no nothing like that. But I just reveled in the culture and the remoteness, and the back to earth type. I just really fitted. But a frustration with the program, with the project. I came across permaculture in 1988 after I'd been in Nepal already for a couple of years, and it just resonated. There was Bill Mollison, that is, had just been to Nepal. And with a local chap, Badri Dao, started an organisation called INSAN, Institute for Sustainable Agriculture in Nepal. I tacked on to that, did some reading, did my PDC with Bill and Lee Harrison in New Zealand in 1989, January, after the third conference and Convergence that was in New Zealand. And then took it on from there. We started a farm in the district where I'd been working as a VSO. I was still with VSO, used that time as a transition then to go independent. And we started the Jajikot Permaculture program, which became hugely popular and successful, mainly if you look at it in terms of the outputs achieved with the money spent. So we were working in 63 villages. We had 12,000 farmers that were connected, staff. We were doing festivals and trainings and 4 different districts. It was huge, or it became huge. But our budget was like the cost of a Land Cruiser. $70,000 or something like that. Where
did you get that money from to get that happening?
Scraped around. I mean, it started with a £500 grant from I think, was it Oxfam, through VSO. So that was the last connection with them, to raise a bit of money, and a loan from my dad to buy the land that I lived on, to start the first farm. So small amounts here and there, basically scraped together. There were some longer term connections as well, which we've greatly appreciated. Some organisations, charities, stuck with us for years and years and years. Very important, and it just grew. It just grew.
So is that original farm, still going, or is it?
No, it's not.
No.
It's been encircled. I actually haven't been back to that district for over 20 years now, because of the Maoist insurgency originally. That I had to leave because of that in the end of the 90s. 1998 was the last time I was there, and I haven't had the chance to go back to that area.
There's lots of questions that have come up for me in what you've just said there first, but maybe we can go right back to the start, when you were saying that you were there and you just really connected with the culture and the way of life, and you just felt it fit. And something that I experienced in Ladakh when in my early 20s, that I felt maybe there's something kind of similar to this, and it's what led me to permaculture as well. I wonder where you, like, with permaculture and the work that you're doing there, how did that fit? And what was the relationship with the local people, how they responded to this thing called permaculture being offered as a way different, I guess, from these other programs that you've seen?
Well, I say the relationship came from the failure of the original project I was working with. Which was about planting trees. And what I found out through the cultural connection was that it's, actually farmers clear trees to farm. So then you say you want to go planting trees, and it's like that's in direct conflict with what they're doing, what they're needing to do in order to maintain and increase the farm productivity. So when permaculture came along, it showed me that it was more than just planting trees. I had to look at local economics, at culture, at farming, not just forestry. And it really just helped me to connect the dots between all those different sectors, and that in fact life is connected and integrated together. So that was the big kind of aha moment with looking at permaculture in those areas.
And
the fact, of course, that as Mollison said, permaculture takes its lessons a lot from acknowledges indigenous cultures as well. And so looking at those, learning what they are is the first step. Before you look to intervene or make an action, it's learn what's there. And so that's why I set to with these new eyes of integration.
So I wonder, what were some of the first things that you noticed that they went, oh, aha, this is useful? Like, what were the things which were the interesting bits for them that they went, oh, well, I'll take that bit, and then opened up to all the other things? What was that first point of connection, you think, that really made them interested in it?
The connection with the land, the understanding of soil and local climate and biodiversity. The seeds, the organic nature. I mean, organic by proxy, really, because these areas were too far to get chemicals and that sort of thing. And it's interesting that, on one hand, that's the situation. On the other hand, what I knew underlying that was that if an organisation came with bags of fertilizer and hybrid seeds, a lot of the farmers would say, oh, yeah, that sounds really good. That must be good because it comes from the outside and it's modern. And, development has traditionally not acknowledge the richness of traditional systems, indigenous systems. They've actually been an impediment to modernization, and that was a big learning for me as well. And so a big part of the work became to acknowledge and appreciate, those systems that farmers have, and to show that actually don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you want to improve your farming, base it on what you've already got, and find what are the niches to improve. What are the tweaks to the system? And there were many. It's not all perfect, and it's a very hard life, subsistence farming, and especially for gender, and for people at the margins and marginal communities. In Nepal, you've got the caste system, which is not one of the indigenous systems I would want to keep. But very patriarchal. So there are challenges about indigenous systems as well. But I'd say the first thing is to learn what they are, and to see, what are the opportunities for improving.
So I want to pick up on the thread that you threw in there about seed. And I know that throughout India, people like Vandana Shiva have been doing a lot of work. Has that work extended into Nepal as well, or is that was there ever an issue with seed? Like, I'm unfamiliar with this territory, so what's going on with seed in Nepal with farmers?
Absolutely. I mean, the same patterns that you see globally. A move to centralization of seed resources, to replacement of indigenous resources with hybrid, genetically modified, etc. That pattern is there, and this attempt by governments lobbied by corporations to take seed resources away from communities and into the hands of corporations. It's frightening.
So is the work that you've done been able to address that? Like, there've been seed banks, community seed banks. Like, what's been happening in that space? Has that been a part of?
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer really for any sensible regenerative project, is that it needs to be involved with seed. So we are indeed, and all the groups we have, we do everything from training in production to facilitating exchange, creating seed banks, and breeding as well to improve, but breeding using local skills, and this isn't hybridization. It's just traditional breeding that farmers have done for thousands of years to improve varieties and land races.
Yeah, just selecting each season to improve it and finding ways to build the strength of it. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you found that have helped to ripple this out? I know that you've been going there every year for how many years now, except for COVID last year, you were saying? Pretty much every year.
35 years.
35 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So what happens when you're not there? Like, I know you do, when you're there, you're doing a lot of coordination work and linking communication work and checking in where everyone's at and helping develop up materials and things. What happens when in the in-between time? Like, who runs the project on the ground, and how has that worked, and how is it continuing to share that idea out into the community, and in what ways is that happening? Sorry, that's a whole lot of questions all in one go. But anyway,
it's a lot of idea. I mean, basically, so basically, everything happens when I'm not there. And the last 2 years has shown how important it is to have those resilient kind of systems. So it's not at all dependent on me. I do play a role. I mean, I started, so in that 1988 when we started, I was farming. I learned my farming on a few farms, in Jajakot basically, and then living with farmers around. I ploughed, collected fodder, firewood, all that sort of thing. Ever since then, the process has been to slowly withdraw from having to do that. It went from the farming to the training. So then I became a trainer, and then passed that on, and then became a trainer's trainer. So moving up levels, and sort of withdrawing from the need to actually be there. And it's not my project at all. I'm just a little cog in the process, in the engine, really. So I call myself an advisor, and I advise, and at the same time network and make connections. Go for fundraising if that's a need. Although we haven't had a significant need for many years now, we're actually in the process of, at the end of a project cycle, 10-year project cycle, and now the onus is actually on how to be not reliant on donors, and how to be able to produce income and resources from within the program, and that's always been an aim, really, but now we're kind of more focused on that. In terms of scaling up, as I mentioned, the first few years, the first 10, 12 years, we went from 0 to 12,000 farmers, 63 villages, etc. It was interesting to see that growth process, and the fact that if it would be always possible for more villagers to come and say, we want to join, and so instead of providing one village with 2 secateurs, you have to provide 10 villages with 2, and that's 20 secateurs. And so you could just keep on expanding until you need 1,000 secateurs, but then all your budget goes on buying secateurs and managing, buying them and sending them and all that sort of thing. And we realised that that's not, that's a continuous growth model, which, as we know, has serious, issues about continuous growth. And so we've learned over the years, in particular over the last 10 or 15 years, that we need to remain small, like a beating heart, but the body around that changes, and the limbs can extend, or rather, not the limbs extend, but the energy and the resources coming out of that body can go away freely, and be like seed, in different. There's lots of parallels with other things, metaphors, to self-germinate. So we've got a core. We've got a core number of villages. Actually, at the moment, it's 31 or 32 villages in 2 districts, and a core staff. And then we have what we call the barefoot consultants. So these are farmer resource people, basically, men and women that have been through the years of training, of applying the principles and the practices on their own land, in their own communities. They then are given specific training, like TOT, trainers training, group facilitation training, and permaculture design, obviously. And then they can go wherever, and we have lots of connections now with other organizations, with local government as well. And they're saying, okay, we want to start this project in that district or that village, send someone, and either they can pay for it as well, and so they basically provide employment for these consultants or barefoot consultants, or we have small amounts of budget that we can pay as well.
Great.
So basically, the idea is that they are actually responsible for spreading and expanding and scaling up.
Yeah.
And we retain a kind of key heart and core of demonstration farms, that we can do that as well. But people come to us. It's not like we have to go out.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question about how important the role of having a really substantial demonstration or network of demonstration farms is to this work in sharing this kind of skill and knowledge.
Absolutely. From the very, very start of the project, we realised that there were 3 main kind of pillars or strategies to have, and the first is demonstration. If you can't see it, seeing is believing is the adage. And you can't do that on a whiteboard or even on a video. I mean, the videos and stuff help, obviously, when you can put things together like that. But to actually go to a place and be able to see it, and touch the plants and understand, the soil and the compost and that sort of thing has to be the first stage. The second stage is then training, because you see something and you think, oh wow, that looks great. How do I learn how is it done? And so the training and the education is the second part. And then the third part is then, well, farmers have they've seen the fruit trees, they've learned how to do grafting and layering and all the technical stuff. Now they need some seed, or they need a mother plant, or it might be a book or a film video, a video or something, the resources to be able to go home and implement it on their own land, in their own community. So those were the three things: demonstration, training, and resource provision. We've since kind of added to that research, because when you have funded, supported, or subsidized farms, you can take risk. And we realize that sometimes that's necessary if you're going to try new things in new context. So that might be for doing no-till or green manures or biofertilizers or something new anyway that that you want to try. Farmers can't afford to fail. That's one of the issues that we found. They can't afford to try things if it's going to fail. They need to try things that they know are going to work. And so research was one extra strategy. And the final one is then advocacy, because if you've got something that works, you need to be able to lobby, local government to say, this is actually where you need to put your resources, not in things that are damaging either social structures, economic structures, or the ecology.
Who's doing that advocacy work? Is that local people there who are leading the program, going and inviting them there, or how do they do that advocacy work?
Again, it links back to the demonstration. So a farmer can advocate something if he can say, well, look, this is what I'm doing, and this is how it's working. And it links then to the training, because when they have the skills to pass that knowledge on, you can be incredibly knowledgeable about things, but not be able to talk to other people or not be able to communicate very well. So to have those skills is to become, a lobbyist, basically. So that's one level. The other level is actually to go to local authorities and say, or understand what their programs are. So, for example, the Agriculture Office might have a program to work with rice farming, and we can say, well, hey, we've got 40 farmers that are growing SRI rice. So that's a specific technique or group of principles that means you need less water and less seed, and it needs to be organic, but you can get 2 or 3 times the productivity. And say, well, we've got these demonstrations. Send your farmers to come and look. And so that's another way. Again, it's based through the actual practical work that's going on.
So through that, like going and saying, look, this is what's happening over here. Come and have a look. Bring your government officers, bring your policy people, bring your farmers. What kind of shifts have you been able to see or to manifest at that level? Like, is there some kind of shift happening in the policy level?
Very slowly. And I mean, it is one of the things that we, from the very start, again, from 1988, we looked to work with local government. And actually some of the horror stories also come from that area. So local government actually imprisoned 2 of our carpenters who went to a village to build beehives and weaving looms, and they were imprisoned in shackles, accused of felling forest and various things, and they were basically treated like murderers in the local jail. And so that's also something that can happen with local authority interaction. They're very temporary. They're usually based just on their own agendas, so we always have to be aware that putting energy into making those connections might often be wasted. However, that obviously doesn't stop you needing to always be open to having those
new conversations. Yeah.
Because
what about in universities or? Sorry, you go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I was going to say sometimes it works and something productive does come out of it. It's a bit hit and miss.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like working here as well. I think, the kind of thing that you're doing is just going out and doing it and setting it up and teaching people and people seeing it, and it speaks for itself in a way, and it's easier sometimes if you've got policy that can help support it. But like I said, just focusing your energy there can sometimes be a real drawdown of energy. And when you're really trying to sort of make every dollar and every bit of energy make the biggest possible difference, I totally get what you're saying. I was just going to ask you whether there was any interest, from universities or research bodies there, like in terms of agroecological approaches, or whether it had got into schools and whether schools were having school gardens and teaching it. Like, where else has it rippled into sort of public space?
Definitely, we have a proactive schools program. So we work with schools in our own project areas, and that's because they've got land. So physical, work on the land with tree planting, gardens, nurseries, etc. But also with curricula. So spending time with kids in their lessons, which the schools are so far in some cases anyway been very happy to provide. Also developing curricula. Or vocational training as part of school curricula. That's also an ongoing thing. So connection with schools is very good. It's very proactive. There is connection with local authorities in some areas to try and, in particular from our side, to try and draw down some funding. So I talked about not being dependent on donors and charities and the like. There's lots of local authority money often, even in a poor country like Nepal. And I say poor in inverted commas. It's rich in many ways. But governments do have money, obviously, for educational, agricultural, health, and livelihoods development, and those are all the areas that we work in. Yeah. So it's very much a work in process, really. Yeah. But we realise that we have to focus on what the farmers are doing and getting those demonstrations, those training resources, getting the proof there, that these systems work. And then, it's up to other people to also take it on, as well as coming back to the policy advocacy and lobbying type work. That really involves also networking with other organizations rather than trying to do that by yourself. And so that's partially the permaculture network within Nepal. That's partially other related things like agroecology, for example, which is getting more press now. So actually permaculture development is quite specific, but agroecological development is becoming much more kind of broadband, so FAO and through FAO, they've got now lobbying and policy structures to what I understand is it feels like it's kind of something that's a little bit easier maybe to grab hold of it, because it's more, it is more about farming, whereas permaculture is more about the whole systems approach, and maybe it's easier just to kind of grasp it. And I hear often in these sorts of conversations that there is, permaculture is considered an agroecological approach. I kind of often flip it around and think about agroecology being
one of the kind of strategies or approaches that you can embed within a permaculture system. I don't know, what's your thinking around that?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And interestingly, when I was talking about the history of the project, and where we went through this kind of 10, 12-year growth from 0 to 12,000 farmers, we didn't use the word permaculture in that, or very, very rarely, because it doesn't translate. There isn't a translation to that word in Nepalese. But looking at agroecology, it's like you take farming and nature, and those two things can be translated very easily. Yes. And is very close to understanding that communities have, because nature is all around them. Mm-hmm. They work with nature every day as soon as they get up. So yes, it's much more translatable without using the P word.
Easy just to grab, yeah. I wanted to ask you too. A couple of years ago there was the disastrous earthquake in Nepal. I wonder what happened. What did you see happen there, in terms of how maybe the work of permaculture being able to help with the disaster relief, or what happened at that point, and how are they going? Yeah. And how are they going now?
Well, so our areas weren't affected directly because they're in the far west of Nepal. Mm-hmm. However, we had one farm in Kathmandu, the Sunrise Farm, that was damaged, and we set up a crowdfunder to repair that. And at the same time, we started up a project that was funded by Lush Cosmetics, to bring the barefoot consultants that I was mentioning earlier, to bring them from our areas to 4 villages that were obliterated basically by the earthquake, and to work with farming systems there, including seed. So you mentioned seed earlier on. Well, our areas actually produced or gifted about 150 kilos of different types of seed, vegetables mainly, but also some grains to some of the earthquake affected areas there, and also then seedlings, so grafted apples and other plants. So they were actually able to provide a whole lot of stuff for free. So they were gifted by these groups, and that was really enriching to see that the farmers, they didn't have any money they could give them, or tarpaulins or that sort of thing, or sacks of rice for immediate disaster response, but they had seed and they had seedlings, and they had people. They had trainers that went to live in these villages. Some of them for 2 or 3 years. Actually,
this is a key part of that resilience, like a permaculture approach being about building long-term resilience, isn't it? Rather than sort of boom or bust, or just, just focusing on one harvest, or just focusing on disaster relief. It really is this for the longer term, and that's fantastic news. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So you're about to go there again soon, I hear, which is very exciting for you, because I know that you were saying early before we got on how much it makes your heart sing to be there. I wanted to ask you, though, how has your work in Nepal informed the work that you do back home in the UK? And how has it changed? Well, maybe you don't have any reference point because you can't always be going there, but how do you feel like it's actually influenced and informed the work that you do? And now even at Applewood Farm too, where you're based it's Herefordshire, isn't it?
That's right.
Get that right? Yeah.
Herefordshire, yeah. Just on the border with Wales. Well, I suppose, the structure of demonstration training and resources is something that was developed in Nepal, but I carry that around with me wherever. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing with other people or organizations is developing resource centers. So that is the basic strategy for that. So you need a resource center is something that demonstrates, trains, and provides resources for or from. And so that has been stuck with me wherever I've been. And it's only in the last 6 years now that we've actually had our own place here as Applewood Permaculture Centre in Herefordshire, and that remains our focus. Our mission is demonstration and education in resilient livelihoods, landscapes, and lifestyles, as the strapline goes. So,
and don't you also do training programs to help people understand how to more effectively work in permaculture development work? Is that something that you're also doing? I know you have in the past with COVID's kind of changed how everyone's doing things lately, but is that something you continue to do?
Definitely, and the development side of it, working in what I call 2/3 world countries, is that's been my life for 35 years, and I'm going to keep doing that, whether I have to do it online or not. So yeah, we had a course. We developed a course, Permaculture for Development Workers, which is where people working in conventional development get permaculture inputs. So like that's about then diversification, integration between different aspects of development, whether it's health, farming, education, livelihoods, whatever, all the different what we call silos of development. Further into then relief, so disaster relief and type projects as well. So the principles are applicable wherever you are and whatever you do, as you know. But we thought, okay, so my experience is that permaculture is very, very well adapted to or adaptable to working in development situations. Bearing in mind that development could be down the road in the local village. That need. So it's about people identifying their needs and being able to meet them and to be able to problem solve, whether that's in Herefordshire or in Nepal or wherever it's relevant. And so I mean, now we're fortunate that we've got our own base here. So instead of going off to other people's farms or communities or places to teach, we do it from here on our own resource centre. But ultimately, that is an extension of the strategy that was developed back in 1988 in the district of Jajikot, in a little corner of a little 1 acre farm. Yeah. So it's kind of gone on.
Is that the sort of size of farm up there that is typical? Like 1 acre farming, is that pretty standard?
Yeah, 1 to 2 acres. I mean, they have then obviously access to a huge amount of community and forest land, which might be in various states of health or degradation. So it was one of the earliest really interesting statistics that I learned about was that to sustainably manage a unit of homestead or small holding in Nepal, so farm, takes 6 units of forest. So that's 1 acre to 6 acres. And that's providing fodder, fuel wood for the household, leaf litter for the livestock, which, and the fodder and the livestock and the leaf litter, obviously that's the nutrient cycle that runs the whole business. But then also wild food, mushrooms, game, all of that, taking all of that into account. The FAO came up with this 6-to-1 ratio. So from a very early time, our aim became to reduce that ratio. So reduce the amount of time and reliance that there is on the forest by design of farms. So we on the demonstration farms that we had originally, we brought that ratio down to 0. We didn't have to leave the farm at all.
Wow.
to get the resources of fodder and firewood and leaf litter to run the farm. It was all produced by on-farm design, mainly through agroforestry, but also green manures and growing biomass on the farms basically, and then cycling that and creating those interactions between different resources.
That's
So we brought it down to zero.
That is profound when you think about it, because often it's things like that, the use of the commons or the use of the forest, even if it's done in a sort of a low impact way, is, as things change, is an externality, and they don't end up getting managed. And so by shifting that pattern, the forests, hopefully the forest can then have more of a chance to be protected and be long-term managed. And also I think it's really fascinating to really explore this idea of the commons. Like, how was that managed, and are the commons still there and available for people? Is this shifting and changing as Nepal modernizes, or as Nepal grows in population and the agriculture's shifted? Like, what's happened to all that common forest?
Well, when I first went there as a forester, one of the things that I learned was that the forests were nationalized probably now about 50 years ago, 50 or 60 years ago, which took the ownership out of communal hands and into government hands. And that's when the problem started in terms of overexploitation. So, you own something, you tend to look after it, even if it's communally owned. But when that's taken away from you and put into government hands, then all of a sudden it's a free resource. So that was one aspect. And what we moved towards, again, through the demonstration and the mobilization, was that by the good design of farms, then you reduce the pressure on the forest. And forests can can regenerate. And you don't need to plant. We stopped planting seedlings quite early on. In community areas, in forest area or degraded forest areas, all you need to do is protect, keep the livestock off, keep the fire off, and we saw regeneration on massive areas of degraded land. One thing where permaculture really helped with that was, of course, the zonation theory. So it was about, okay, the farm, if you look at a farm as sort of zone 1 to 3, zone 4 is then the communal grazing areas, and zone 5 are the forest areas. Then the aim of good design, as far as I understand it, is to not rely on the 5, to have a regenerative 4, and then to focus your production on 1 to 3 or 0 to 3, in fact.
Right.
Which is where we were able to, not need to go to zone 5, and we brought those resources onto the farm.
Brilliant. That's so fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's a really important point. And just as you were talking about it too, I'm wondering too what the impact of climate change is having on the forest, on the landscape, on water systems, on communities there. What's going on up there?
Well, again, it's similar patterns to that you see all over. Unseasonal rainfall. Temperatures hasn't been such an issue, but rainfall has, in particular. So it rains when it shouldn't, and it doesn't rain when it should. Harvest time is when it should be sunny and dry, and if it's raining, it damages your crops. So they have definitely been feeling the effects. In fact, even 20 years ago, we were starting to see, farmers were saying, this is different, something's changing here. What I've always said is that actually the techniques and strategies to be resilient in general work for climate change. So, more organic matter in the soil, more diversity, more emphasis on perennials, capture your water, put it in the soil, put it into biomass, extend your growing seasons, increase your options, like, multi systems for important functions. So that's what we needed to be doing anyway. And the good news is that works to mitigate a lot of the effects of climate change. But at the same time, understanding that farmers need to be also adaptable because it is changing, and really need to kind of shore up resources and make sure that the resources are being regenerated as much as possible. The first activity is always do no harm.
Yeah.
So stop activities that are harming, and that's chemicals, and that's often tillage or leaving the soil bare. There are times when it's appropriate to do that, I would also add, but stop harming is what we have to do. We have to design our systems to remove that. And it's not like saying, okay, well, we'll cope with a certain amount of damage and poisoning of the land. It's like, no, don't, stop that work that is harming the environment, harming biodiversity, harming water and harming air. So that needs to be stopped. And then we can look at, okay, how do we kind of shore up the defenses and protect and create more resilient systems.
Yeah. I was wondering too, excuse me, about taking the lessons from this work and applying it to, the communications that you do at a global scale. You're talking in regenerative collab type, permaculture collab type groups. How are the lessons that you're learning on your place in Nepal also then helping to inform broader conversations in permaculture? As someone who's been in permaculture since pretty much the beginning, it's where do you see your role in that?
Well, interestingly, before our chat started, I was on a call with a group in the UK that are connected to the Permaculture Association, working on the land, what's called the Land Project, learning and demonstration, and that is about setting up, or not setting up, but promoting and supporting people and communities that want to do this demonstration and training type stuff. So maybe it was a long time ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, the Permaculture Association got lottery funding to start a project, and that, in fact, was partially informed by the work we were doing in Nepal. Mm-hmm. So demonstration, training, and resource production, as I've mentioned, the three kind of pillars or strategies, was taken up by the Permaculture Association here, they got funding through the lottery to set up a network of centres, so land centres or land learner centres, so on the way to being a land centre, which is basically a centre or a place, could be a back garden or a front garden even, where people would go and they'd leave understanding what permaculture was. So that was the main kind of output.
That's brilliant, yeah. And so that network exists now, and people can join that network still. It's still open.
That's exactly what the meeting was about. Was about redeveloping, because that was happening some 15 years ago, and it was only funded. It was like I think funded for 10 years or so, and it was like, well, how do we keep that going? And we didn't quite have the perfect design or the functional design to do that, so it fell a bit by the wayside. Having created a network of over 100 different places, from literally from back gardens to like 2 or 3 acre holdings. So then we looked at, okay, how do we take up to farm level? And that became the Farmland Project. And now it's being revamped, and we're also calling it iLand, which is there's another aspect which is iLand, which is international land centres. So it's also kind of on a global level as well, where we're just looking to create some of it is already there. It's not inventing new stuff. It's also just coordinating and linking up things that are already going on. And making that a kind of a learning and demonstration resource for people everywhere. And, in 2/3 world places, it's going to be different. In tropical, subtropical areas, it's going to be different. In rich countries or urban areas, it's going to be different. Obviously, in the West, we have many more people living in cities, and so urban permaculture is much more significant to people connect with. And it's really exciting that we're now revamping this design to create more of these centres that are supported and then can share their own experiences, because I think that's actually where we have to go. We know these systems work. We know people enrich themselves, their families, their land, their communities by doing this stuff. So it's like, well, how do we make that more accessible to
and I think that's the thing too. Also, having those connected, it has a much bigger voice in a way of being more visible to the world beyond the permaculture world. So if you're interested in permaculture, you know where to go to find that information. But it can also be, in a way, a leverage point for advocating for systems change, because we can see that this system, permaculture has trainers everywhere around the world. Permaculture has demonstrations everywhere around the world. It's working but together we can actually then start to shift things and layer other conversations over that. So I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I will, in the show notes for this podcast, put a link to that work as well, if it's possible. The island, is that something that we can?
So there's island. There's several projects going on that are similar and parallel. So the land network in the UK. So that would be a link to the Permaculture Association.
Yep.
And their land project site. The island is also a work in process. So there is a format that people can actually apply to be a land centre. And we've got people from all places, from Asia, Africa, from all over so far. But it's also a work in process. It's being developed.
Yeah.
So it needs more people being involved with it as well.
Great.
So yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Wonderful. So I know that you're very busy at this moment getting prepared for a workshop at your place. What's coming up for you? What are you doing this weekend?
Well, I mean, with the pandemic, we've actually not had much going on here for the last couple of years almost. We've moved a lot to online design courses and other stuff. My partner Luby's on with her cultural emergence. The people and permaculture side has been doing a lot more online stuff. So this is one of the opportunities that, with the relaxing of restrictions, we've wanted to go for. We've got a forest garden weekend coming up.
Nice.
So
excellent.
So learning about what, why, and how for forest gardening.
Fantastic. So, and where do people just come from all over the UK for that? Where do you find people coming from?
Yeah, all over. I mean, if it's a larger course like the TOTS, the trainers training, we get people also from Europe coming to those as well. But hopefully next year is the aim is to do a trainers training, face-to-face trainers training, as opposed to an online one, of course.
Yeah. But, we used to have lots of courses happening here at Crystal Waters too. And I remember when I was running the PDCs and the advanced permaculture courses of all different sorts, there was generally half people from Australia and half from around the world. It's just totally not possible at this point in time. People can't get in or out of Australia. So the world has changed a lot since then. But
it's shown us the value of online linkage as well, because actually, a course can be much more accessible to people that can't travel. It's reducing, obviously, the travel cost, the carbon footprint of travel. And generally, we found that we can run them cheaper because, there are certain elements we don't have to pay for.
Yeah.
And so that makes it a lot more accessible to people on lower incomes as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you found that with your courses.
It's such an amazing different way of teaching, and it's been such a fascinating way to explore connecting and creating communities of practice and design studios and education labs and conversation circles and all sorts of things that just keep the conversation going rather than just the course and then you're finished. It's an ongoing community, which is fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. It's been an absolute delight to sort of dive into your world of permaculture. I know that it's something that you obviously, like me, will just continue for the rest of your life, and obviously too the fact that you're still as committed to it, or maybe more than what you ever were. That there's something about the possibilities in the future and addressing all the multiple crises that we're facing now. There's something in permaculture you feel is really key, and maybe that could be something you could just end with a couple of reflections on that. Like, what is the future that you hope through a permaculture way of being?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's quite straightforward. It's connect with nature. It's what I think one of the roots of the problems that we have is the disconnection with nature. It's why certainly why we're in the sort of climate and biodiversity situation that we are. So permaculture will give that. It will give that reconnection with nature. And the second thing is stop doing the harm. Stop any practices. I remember Bill. One of the things from Bill's course was he had 3 steps for participation. One was stop your use of non-renewable resources. So that's the fossil fuels. So get off that. One was connect yourself to the growing cycle. So that's grow your own food or be connected to growing food. And I know that not everyone can grow food for various reasons. And the third was make linkages with like-minded people. So, what's interesting is that all of those 3 things you can start doing right now, in some way, today, tomorrow, and that has always stayed with me it was great at making really effective, low-cost statements. Small statements, but with big meanings. And so that sticks with me. So reconnect with nature, stop any harmful activities, and leave a system better than you found it is the other application that I find. And that might be the kitchen sink when it's time to wash up, or it might be...
I wish my kids knew that.
That's what I teach them. Leave it better than you found it. Or it might be your community or woodland or whatever.
Yeah, it's a kind of very simple common sense, but incredibly powerful. And it's so great too that you had the chance to, at a young age, spend time with Bill and really be immersed in his world. It must have been quite an extraordinary thing to have that opportunity to do that.
It was very enriching, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Enjoy your forest garden course and your trip back to Nepal when you are able to do that. That's just wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you very much. It's been great chatting.
Yeah,
Morag.
You too. All right. That's over. Chop. Thank you, Chris. That was just wonderful. Brilliant. Yeah. Great. Oh. So much richness in that. So many key lessons of just really cutting it down to like what are some of those key steps. And I think, people can really grab hold of those and go, oh, yeah, that's totally doable. I can do that. And at whatever scale, you can keep coming back to those pillars at whatever level you are in your experience and, hang different things off it. So it can be simple and small, or it can be this multi-pronged project, but with those things.
Yeah. Keeping it simple. One thing I learned about indigenous systems, or indigenous ethics and principles, is that they usually come in groups of 2 or 3. So which is also around simplicity, and but also, scale and appropriateness. If sometimes, like Holmgren's 12 principles, it's like, wow, there's 12. How can we remember all of those different things? But you've only got 3 ethics.
Yeah.
And so that's really good. And then you've got demonstration, training, and resources. It's just 3 things.
Yeah.
And Bill's
you can get up to a handful, I think. That's probably the max, isn't it?
Yeah.
One for each finger. That's it.
Well, yeah. But a lot of indigenous systems work at that level, that scale. So 2 or 3 things, or a handful of things, and that's how they can assemble their modes of living.
I think it's like you're saying, it's for anyone really. Like I even have trouble trying to remember. I managed to get, when it was originally Mollison's 10, I got those really nailed. I don't know if I could even nail off, all the 12 principles just off the top of my head in that order. It doesn't stick so much. Like I know them intuitively and how, but to be able to list them off just doesn't kind of.
Yeah. But the ethics are simple because there's only 3.
So that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining me. If you like a copy of my top 10 books to read, click the link below, pop in your email, and I'll send it straight to you. You can also watch this interview over on my YouTube channel. I'll put the link below as well. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and if you've enjoyed it, please consider giving me a star rating. Believe it or not, the more people do this, the more podcast bots will discover this little podcast. So thanks again, and I'll see you again next week.